Welcome, Wanderer of the Quiet Hours. This is the Sleepy Historian, and you have arrived at another chapter of what some call boring history for sleep. It is a place of calm narration, where the rhythm of the past drifts gently into your evening, where the steady pace of forgotten stories helps you unwind, perhaps even close your eyes, and eventually drift away into rest. If this kind of storytelling helps you settle into the night, feel free to like this video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. Let me know down in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Somehow, it is strangely comforting to imagine a little community of listeners scattered across the world, lying in dimly lit rooms, all falling asleep to the same old stories. Tonight's subject takes us into Middle Ages, into a world of castles, cloisters, feasts, and finery. But beneath the shimmer of gold leaf and the rustle of silks, life was not always as enviable as it might seem. In fact, one might say that the worst part of being rich in medieval times was not the weight of coins in a purse, but the weight of responsibility, expectation, and even danger. In this calm bedtime storytelling, we will not rush. Instead, we will gently wander through four perspectives, for quiet journeys through history. First, we will immerse ourselves in the daily life of the wealthy, the sights and sounds of their households, the unchanging routines that mark their days. Then, we will pause for a biographical tale, a life, or an episode that brings the theme into focus. From there, we will step into mysterious objects, archaeological traces, and cultural puzzles that remind us how distant and yet familiar this past really is. Finally, we will contrast the lives of the wealthy with those who live below them, the ordinary men and women whose existence, while less privileged, was sometimes less burdened as well. This is not a tale of battles shouted across smoky fields. It is not a story of gory detail or clashing swords. Instead, it is a soft-spoken history documentary, a kind of calm bedtime storytelling. Think of it as a history sleep story, where the whisper of ancient lives becomes a lullaby. So dim the lights. Let the voices of the past slip into the background of your evening. Imagine yourself walking quietly through the corridors of a stone-built manor, candlelight flickering on the walls, the air cool and heavy with the scent of beeswax and old stone. Outside, a horse shifts in the stable. Somewhere in the hall, a servant's footsteps echo faintly. The night is long, and history is waiting to tell its tale. And so, with a gentle breath, we begin. Imagine yourself stepping through a great wooden doorway, its iron hinges creaking softly as it swings shut behind you. You are now inside the world of the medieval wealthy, not the noisy, bustling life of the village or market, but the quieter, more contained rhythm of a noble household. The first impression is not one of luxury in the way we often imagine it today. Instead, it is a sense of scale. The ceilings are high, the stone walls broad, the space is cavernous enough that the air carries a faint chill even in summer. A faint echo follows your footsteps, because carpets are rare and wooden floors are left bare. The warmth of the hearth is welcome, yet even this does not fully banish the coolness of stone. Servants pass by in steady routines, their steps measured and their eyes often lowered. A wealthy household in the Middle Ages was not a family alone. It was an institution, with dozens of attendants, stewards, cooks, laundresses, and grooms. To be rich in this age was not to have privacy, but the opposite, to live surrounded by people at nearly every hour of the day. Imagine waking in the morning not to silence, but to the sound of servants preparing your chamber, carrying water in heavy pitchers, or laying out clothing stitched in expensive dyes. Meals, too, were performances. Breakfast might be simple, but by midday, dining was a ritual. The wealthy ate in a hall, often seated at raised tables, where food was not just nourishment but display. Platters of roasted meats, trenchers of bread, and pitchers of ale were served with ceremony. Yet here lies one of the paradoxes of medieval wealth. The diet was rich, but not necessarily healthy. Imagine heavy dishes laden with fat and spices, eaten day after day. Fresh fruits and vegetables, common on a peasant's table in season, were less prominent in noble kitchens, where meat and wine were signs of status. The very foods that marked privilege could leave one sluggish or unwell. And beyond the dining hall, there was noise. A wealthy household was never truly quiet. The crackle of fires, the bark of hounds, the voices of retainers, all blended into a constant hum. Privacy, something we prize so deeply today, was scarce. Even the lord and lady of the manor often slept in chambers that others entered freely, whether to tend the fire, deliver messages, or assist with clothing. Imagine trying to drift into dreams while a chamberlain shuffled quietly in the corner, or while a guard paced the hallway outside. The architecture wealth was grand, but not always comfortable. Windows were narrow slits, meant more for defense than for light. Glass was rare, and shutters clattered in the wind. At night, a chamber could feel drafty, despite the thickest tapestries on the walls. Bedding was softer than what peasants knew, stuffed with feathers rather than straw. Yet even here, fleas and lice were constant companions. To be wealthy did not mean to escape such irritations. It only meant you endured them on finer sheets. We might think of wealth as freedom, yet for the medieval rich, it was also duty. A noble household was a center of local governance, of hospitality, and of protection. To host guests was not optional. It was an expectation. Imagine on a cold evening, a troop of visiting knights arriving at your hall, expecting not only food and fire, but entertainment and beds. To fail in such duties would be a mark of shame. As you sit by the hearth, perhaps wrapped in a fur-lined cloak, the firelight dances across the stone, and you realize that even in this wealth, comfort was relative. The manor was impressive, yes, but it was also cold, crowded, and filled with the endless rhythm of obligations. Wealth gave power, but it also demanded constant maintenance, and a life lived always in the presence of others. The rhythm of their lives was steady, yet heavy, like the turning of a great wheel. Morning prayers, meals, visits, audiences with tenants, the settling of disputes, the preparation for journeys, all passed in sequence, day after day. Beneath the finery lay routine, beneath the routine lay fatigue, and beneath the fatigue lay the subtle truth that being rich in the Middle Ages was not always enviable, but often exhausting. And so, as we rest within this imagined hall, we will soon step deeper. From the general patterns of daily life, we will next follow the path of a particular figure, to see how well-shaped and strained a life lived in the glare of power. Imagine the slow unfolding of a day within the walls of a medieval manor. Morning begins not with the sound of an alarm clock or the glow of an electronic screen, but with the call of nature and the rhythm of household activity. A cock crows in the courtyard. The sound of clattering buckets carries faintly through the corridors as servants draw water from the well. In the great hall, fires are coaxed back to life, smoke rising to curl along the beams. For the wealthy, the day begins with ritual. Morning prayers, often spoken in a small private chapel, frame the first moments of consciousness. Imagine kneeling on a cool stone floor, the faint scent of incense lingering, the distant chant of a priest or chaplain filling the stillness. To be wealthy in the Middle Ages was to be expected to embody piety as well as power. The rhythm of their lives was spiritual as much as material, shaped by church bells and feast days as much as by meals and labor. After prayers, there was business. The lord or lady of the household did not live idly, despite the presence of countless attendants. Instead, they bore responsibility for the lands around them. Imagine sitting at a heavy oak table, parchment spread out before you, as stewards bring reports of rents, harvest yields, or disputes among tenants. The wealthy were administrators, judges, and hosts, whether or not they wished to be. Meals, too, had layers of formality. While the food might seem lavish, the rules of etiquette were just as important as the dishes themselves. A nobleman might drink wine from a silver goblet, but he would share trenchers of bread with his companions, dipping into sauces with careful decorum. Imagine a hall filled not with the chatter of equals, but with the murmurs of attendants, the soft scrape of knives on wood, and the quiet awareness that every gesture was being observed. Afternoons might be filled with training or leisure, though both carried purpose. Wealthy men were expected to keep their martial skills sharp. Picture the clatter of wooden swords striking the practice yard, the heavy thud of a lance against a target. Wealth brought the duty of defense, and so a noble household was also a military one. For women, responsibilities were no less demanding. The lady of the manor oversaw the functioning of the household, stores of grain, cloth, wine, and salt. Imagine the steady calculations of what must be bought, what must be preserved, what must be rationed for winter. Her work was as managerial as any modern office, though performed in gowns of fine fabric and by candlelight. In the evenings, the pace softened. Candles flickered, musicians played lutes or harps, and stories were told. Yet even here, leisure was performance. A guest might be entertained with a tale of Arthur's knights or a song of Charlemagne's deeds, all to reinforce the culture and nobility. Imagine sitting in such a hall, the music lilting and repetitive, the stories long and winding, their rhythm soothing but also inescapable. And beyond these rituals of comfort and culture lay the unspoken truth. Wealth brought surveillance. Every action of the lord or lady was seen, noted, and often judged. To laugh too freely, to eat too greedily, to display too little piety, all could tarnish reputation. Imagine never truly being alone, never fully free to stumble or sigh, because your life was always a performance of those around you. Even in private chambers, there was rarely solitude. Servants attended fires, laid out night clothes, and maintained watch against danger. A wealthy life was one of constant company, and while this presence provided security, it also left little room for personal peace. As the day ended, prayers once again framed the rhythm. Imagine the final hush of a chapel at night, the faint glow of oil lamps, the steady drone of whispered Latin. The day that began with ritual now ended with ritual. The cycle was complete, and tomorrow would begin again, as it had yesterday, and as it would tomorrow. The wealth of the Middle Ages did not always glitter with freedom. It was instead bound by cycles, expectations, and obligations, routines that marked each hour, rituals that defined every day. For those who lived them, the grandeur of castles and manors may have been impressive, but the life within them was one of structure and surveillance, comfort laced with constant responsibility. In the next part of our journey, we will linger a little longer in these lives, focusing on the hidden burdens, the discomforts, the health challenges, and the unexpected struggles that wealth could never truly erase. Imagine, for a moment, lying upon a feather mattress in a grand chamber, a canopy stretched above, heavy curtains drawn to keep out drafts. At first glance, it seems luxurious. The sheets are finer, the bed larger, the chamber richly adorned with tapestries. Yet as the night deepens, you might notice the imperfections that wealth could never fully overcome. The air remains cool, seeping in from stone walls. The fire in the hearth burns low, and with it, the warmth fades. Insects, tiny and persistent, find their way even into the richest of rooms. Wealth offered a softer bed, but never complete comfort. One of the least enviable aspects of being rich in medieval times was a diet that marked status. Meat was plentiful in noble kitchens, often roasted or stewed in abundance. Exotic spices, imported from distant lands, flavored dishes, while wine flowed freely. Yet such foods, eaten daily, brought their own troubles. Stomachs grew heavy, ailments common. Imagine long banquets where course followed course, until satiety tipped into discomfort. The irony of privilege was that those who had too much often felt worse than those who had little. Health care for the wealthy was another paradox. They had access to physicians, herbalists, and apothecaries, but medieval medicine offered little certainty. Remedies were often based on humors, astrology, or long-standing tradition rather than effective science. Imagine being treated for an ailment with bloodletting or pungent concoctions, administered with great ceremony but little relief. Wealth ensured treatment, but not necessarily healing. Another hidden burden was danger. To be wealthy was to be visible, and to be visible was to attract envy. Robbers, rival families, and even discontented peasants might see the lord of manor not as a leader, but as a target. This meant a constant presence of guards, locked gates, and watchful eyes. Imagine walking your own halls and knowing that safety required men-at-arms at the door. The grandeur of wealth was always paired with an undercurrent of unease. And then there was travel. Nobles were expected to move between estates, attend courts, and fulfill obligations to kings or higher lords. Yet travel was no easy comfort. Roads were muddy, dangerous, and slow. Carriages jolted along uneven paths. Horses stumbled, and weather was unkind. To journey with wealth meant to carry baggage, servants, guards, and animals. A caravan that moved ponderously, exposed to both the elements and potential threats. Imagine days of rain seeping into cloaks and boots, the chill wind settling into one's bones, all endured simply because duty demanded presence elsewhere. Even leisure was touched by discomfort. Hunting, a favorite pastime of the elite, was not just sport but ritual. Picture the dam before us, the strain of long rides, the unpredictability of weather. To us, it may sound like freedom, but for nobles, it was another performance, a demonstration of skill, courage, and endurance. Failing in the hunt was not just personal disappointment, but a mark against one's status. Finally, there were the pressures of lineage and reputation. To be wealthy was to be part of a network of alliances and marriages, each decision carrying weight. Imagine the quiet conversations in candlelit chambers, where parents discuss betrothals not as matters of affection, but as calculations of land and power. A noble child's future was rarely their own. Even love, perhaps the most personal of choices, was often shaped by the stern arithmetic of inheritance. And so, wealth in the Middle Ages was a curious paradox. From a distance, it glittered with promise. Fine clothes, strong walls, abundant food. But up close, it revealed drafts, burdens, ailments, and responsibilities. To be rich was to be bound, bound to expectation, bound to duty, bound to the unrelenting gaze of others. As we leave this first segment, picture again the gray hall at night. The fire burns low, shadows stretch across the stone, and a nobleman or lady rests uneasily in a bed that seems comfortable but is never fully so. Outside, the world is dark and uncertain. Inside, wealth surrounds him, yet sleep may not come easily. In the next segment, we will follow the thread of particular life, a biography or episode that brings these themes into sharper focus, showing us not just the general burdens of wealth, but how one individual carried them. Imagine a child, born not into poverty, but into the complicated weave of minor nobility. His name was William Marshall, born around the year 1147. At first, his future was uncertain. He was a younger son of a family that had more titles and wealth, more obligations and resources. In the Middle Ages, younger sons rarely inherited much. Land went to the eldest, and others had to carve their path through service. For William, that meant the life of a knight. As a boy, he was sent away from home to learn the arts of chivalry, riding, weaponry, courtesy, and obedience. Imagine him as a youth, rising before dawn, his breath misting in the cold morning air, practicing with wooden swords in the training yard. This was the foundation of his wealth to be. not inherited estates, but the skills of a warrior and the reputation he could build. By the time William reached manhood, he had become skilled enough to enter the world of tournaments. These were not the stylized just we imagine from stories, but sprawling melees across open fields. Knights charge at one another in groups, clashing in a chaos of armor, horses, and lances. Wealthy nobles participated not just for honor, but for gain. Capturing opponents meant ransoms, and ransoms meant income. William excelled. Imagine the noise of iron against iron, the thundering hooves, and amid it all, a young knight steadily rising in fortune. But wealth earned through skill brought responsibility. William became a household knight for powerful lords, and eventually for the young prince, Henry, son of King Henry II of England. His loyalty and skill gained him favor, but also entangled him in politics. Serving princes and kings meant being drawn into conflicts that were as much about courtly rivalries as about battlefields. Imagine the subtle pressure. Every word and action weighed, every loyalty questioned. In time, William married Isabel de Clare, one of the greatest heiresses of her age. With her came vast lands in Ireland, Wales, and England. Overnight, William went from a knight dependent on others to one of the richest men in the realm. Yet here we see the paradox again. Wealth did not bring freedom. It brought endless obligation. Imagine suddenly being responsible for thousands of tenants, for castles scattered across distant regions, for the defense of borders constantly under strain. Wealth meant walls to maintain, armies to provision, disputes to settle. Even as he grew in age and renown, William Marshal was never free from duty. He served 5 kings of England across his lifetime, often as regent, advisor, and guardian. When King John died in 1216, it was William, an old man of nearly 70, who took charge of the kingdom and safeguarded the throne for the boy king, Henry III. Imagine the burden of ruling not only vast lands of your own, but stabilizing an entire kingdom racked by rebellion and foreign threat. And yet, despite his fortune, William Marshal's life was marked by constant strain. Wealth demanded that he never step aside, that he fight, negotiate, and govern until his very last days. When he finally fell ill, he retired to a monastery, choosing a quiet and away from the courts and castles that had defined him, surrounded by monks. He exchanged his knightly armor for a simple habit, preparing for death with the same steady discipline he had shown in life. In William's story, we glimpse the reality of wealth in the Middle Ages. It was not simply treasure and ease. It was duty, vigilance, and ceaseless labor. Imagine, again, a man who had risen from obscurity to become one of the greatest knights of his age, yet who, in his final days, sought only peace and simplicity. Wealth, it seemed, had been both his crown and his burden. In the next part, we will stay with this theme of biography, turning to the domestic and personal pressures that wealth created within noble families, and how the very households that glittered from afar were up close, heavy with expectation. Imagine a great hall, filled not with music or feasting, but with quiet conversations behind carved wooden screens. Here, in the private corners of noble households, wealth spoke not only in coin or land, but in marriages, alliances, and children's futures. For William Marshal and his wife, Isabel de Clare, life was marked by this constant arithmetic of lineage. Isabel was one of the most desirable heiresses of her generation, her land stretching across 3 kingdoms. Their marriage was not born of courtly romance, but strategy, carefully arranged to secure power and influence. And yet, by the accounts that survive, their bond grew into respect and even affection. Still, the foundation of their union was not choice, but obligation. Imagine being a noble daughter in such a world. Your marriage would rarely be yours to decide. Instead, it was a contract negotiated by parents, guardians, or even kings. Wealthy young women were pawns on the chessboard of politics, their dowries and inheritances shaping the fortunes of families. A girl might be betrothed before she reached adolescence, her future husband decades older. To refuse was rarely an option. To consent was expected. For noble sons, expectations were no lighter. The eldest bore the burden of inheritance, lands to manage, tenants to oversee, and alliances to honor. Younger sons, like William Marshall once was, faced the pressure of finding their own path, often through the church, the military orders, or marriage into lesser fortunes. Wealth promised opportunity, but it also narrowed choices. Imagine the quiet weight of knowing that your life's direction had already been charted by birth. Within the household, family life was less private than we might expect. A noble couple rarely raised their children alone. Tutors, chaplains, nurses, and servants surrounded them. Children were often fostered in the households of other nobles, building networks of loyalty, but also separating families. Imagine saying farewell to your young son or daughter, sending them to be raised by strangers so that future bonds of allegiance could be secured. To be rich was to belong not only to your family, but to the political web that your family represented. And then there were the pressures of reputation. A family's honor was fragile, always vulnerable to scandal or misstep. A failed marriage alliance, a dishonorable act, even a careless word could tarnish generations of standing. Imagine carrying the knowledge that your every gesture, your every choice, was not just yours but your family's. Wealth did not shield from this. It magnified it. Even in the rhythms of daily domestic life, the burdens of fortune were present. The lady of the manor oversaw stores and supplies, while also managing the conduct of dozens of servants. The lord balanced tenants' needs with his obligations to overlords and kings. Imagine the strain of running not just a household, but an entire miniature world, where every loaf of bread baked, every piece of cloth spun, every dispute resolved reflected on your standing. The story of William Marshall's family illustrates this well. He and Isabel had 10 children, each of whom was woven into the tapestry of alliances across England, Ireland, and Wales. Their daughters married into great houses. Their sons inherited vast lands, but also the weight of expectation. And within 2 generations, much of that fortune fractured, parceled out, and diminished through marriages and inheritances. What seemed unshakable at William's death in 1219 was already fragile by the mid-13th century. Wealth was abundant, but security was elusive. In this, we see another truth. To be wealthy in medieval times was not simply to live richly in the present, but to carry the constant anxiety of the future. Lands could be lost, alliances broken, heirs could die young, and fortunes could vanish. Imagine lying awake in a chamber heavy with tapestries, the fire low, wondering whether your descendants will hold what you had worked so hard to build. And so, behind the glitter of noble titles and sprawling estates lay the intimate burdens of family. Wealth promised stability, yet often delivered uncertainty. For the medieval rich, family was not only comfort, but also strategy, not only love, but also duty. In the next part, we will continue with biography and event, stepping into broader stage, where nobles and kings bore not only personal burdens, but the weight of political conflict, showing how wealth could turn from a gift into a danger. Imagine yourself standing in the hall of a great castle, banners hanging from the rafters, armored guards at the doors, courtiers whispering along the walls. To enter such a space as a wealthy noble was to feel the full weight of privilege, and yet also the sharp edge of danger. For in the Middle Ages, wealth and power were rarely secure. They attracted rivals, suspicion, and the unpredictable favor of kings. William Marshall's life is again instructive. He served 5 English kings: Henry II, his son the young king, Richard the Lionheart John, and finally the boy Henry III. Each king had his own temperament, his own needs, and his own suspicions. Wealthy nobles like William lived under the constant gaze of these monarchs. their fortunes rising or falling with royal favor. Imagine the unease of knowing that your vast lands, your castles, your very life could be stripped away by a king's signature or by a single whispered accusation of disloyalty. King John, in particular, tested William's loyalty. John was known for suspicion, for his quick temper, and for demanding ever more from his lords. Nobles who displeased him could find their castles confiscated, their heirs taken as hostages, or their reputations smeared. Imagine sitting across from a king who held both your wealth and your family's safety in his hands, forced to smile, to pledge loyalty, to serve, even when distrust weighed heavily. And beyond royal suspicion lay the dangers of rebellion and war. Wealthy nobles were expected to raise troops, to ride at the king's side, to defend borders and besiege castles. Their fortune was bound to the battlefield. Imagine the strain of knowing that each campaign risked not only your life, but also the stability of your estates left behind. A defeat in war could mean not just personal ruin, but the unraveling of an entire family's legacy. Even the very symbols of wealth could become liabilities. Castles, those proud stone fortresses, were both homes and targets. To build them was to invite envy. To garrison them was to drain resources, and to hold them was to shoulder constant risk. Imagine walking along the battlements of your own castle, gazing out at fields that might one day host the banners of enemies, whether foreign invaders, rival lords, or even your own king turned against you. And then there were the subtler dangers, accusations of treason, rival claims of inheritance, shifting alliances. A wealthy noble could be celebrated one year and condemned the next. Power in the Middle Ages was like a tapestry, intricate and beautiful, but held together by fragile threads. One cut, one pulled strand, and the whole could unravel. William Marshall survived longer than most because of his careful balance of loyalty and discretion. Yet even he could not escape the burden of constant vigilance. His life, for all its honor and reputation, was one of unending responsibility. In the end, he found peace only in retreat, choosing the quiet walls of monastery over the ceaseless tumult of court and castle. Through his story, we see the worst truth about being rich in medieval times. Wealth was never secure, and privilege was never without peril. It carried duties that wore upon the body, expectations that pressed upon the mind, and dangers that shadowed every step. And so, as we leave this biographical journey, imagine once more the flicker of torchlight in a royal hall, the guarded smiles of nobles, the wary glances between rivals. Behind every robe of velvet and every jeweled ring lay fear, calculation, and the ever-present knowledge that fortune could change with the turn of the season. In the next segment, we will turn to mystery and culture, to the traces left in objects, artifacts, and customs, which reveal even more about how well-shaped and sometimes burdened the lives of the medieval rich. Imagine entering a medieval chamber filled with treasures, heavy wooden chests bound in iron, tapestries woven with threads of gold, goblets of silver resting upon carved oak tables. To the eye, these things shimmer with beauty, with power. Yet to those who owned them, there were also responsibilities, weighty burdens requiring care, vigilance, and constant protection. Archaeology tells us much about these objects. Excavations of castles often reveal fragments of luxury, shards of imported glass, remnants of fine pottery, gilded book clasps, and jewelry buried within forgotten corners. These are not merely decorations. They were status symbols, meant to display wealth to visitors. Imagine yourself walking into such a hall. The chill of stone walls might be softened by thick tapestries, woven not just for warmth but to impress. Every item was a message, a declaration. This family is powerful. This house endures. Yet these treasures were fragile. Gold could tarnish. Fabrics could fade. Manuscripts required careful preservation. Wealth demanded constant upkeep. Servants and stewards were tasked with polishing, mending, and guarding. Imagine the quiet routine of a steward unlocking a chest, counting coins by candlelight, recording each transaction with quill and ink, always aware that mistakes could cost him dearly. Artifacts unearthed by archaeologists also reveal the paradox of medieval wealth. While objects were splendid, they often lived short lives of usefulness. Goblets were melted down, jewels reset into new designs, garments unraveled to reclaim threads. Wealth was not permanent. It shifted form, moving through generations like water poured from one vessel into another. What survives today, a brooch, a ring, a fragment of cloth, is only a whisper of what once filled noble halls. We also find mystery in the hidden hoards, caches of coins and jewels buried in times of unrest. Across Europe, archaeologists have uncovered small treasures carefully hidden beneath floors or within earthen pots. Why were they never retrieved? Were their owners slain in war, exiled, or did they simply forget where they had buried their wealth? Each hoard carries with it a silent story, a mystery we can never fully unravel. But beyond physical wealth, there were cultural burdens. To be rich was to sponsor the church, to endow monasteries, to commission illuminated manuscripts or towering cathedrals. Imagine the pressure of knowing that wealth was not merely for comfort, but also for public duty. Failure to show generosity could tarnish one's reputation, while extravagant spending might strain even the richest estate. Wealth demanded not only possession, but performance. And so, the objects of wealth, dazzling though they were, carried heavy expectations. They spoke of pride, but also of anxiety. They shimmered in torchlight, but they also whispered of fragility, impermanence, and the ever-present fear of loss. As we look at these artifacts today in glass museum cases, it is easy to admire their beauty, but perhaps, in the stillness of the night, we can also hear the echo of medieval nobles worrying over them, counting, polishing, locking them away, always fearing that fortune, so bright in one moment, might vanish in the next. In the next part, we will explore rituals, symbolism, and hidden meanings behind the culture of medieval wealth, how rich people express their status in ways both mysterious and revealing. Wealth in medieval times was not only measured in gold or land, but in the rituals that displayed it. Imagine a grand feast held within a stone hall, torches flickering, shadows playing across high vaulted ceilings. The rich did not simply eat. They performed their wealth. Silver platters bore roasted meats, gilded goblets shimmered with imported wine, and musicians filled the air with the soft strains of harp and flute. Each detail was carefully curated, not just to satisfy hunger, but to remind all present of the host's power and prosperity. The ritual of giving was equally important. Nobles and kings demonstrated wealth through patronage. Picture a lord presenting a jeweled chalice to a monastery, or commissioning a massive cathedral whose spire reached toward the heavens. These acts were not simply pious. They were symbolic gestures, transforming worldly wealth into spiritual credit. A stone carved with the donor's likeness ensured remembrance long after their death. Even clothing carried symbolic weight. Bright colors, rich fabrics, and intricate embroidery announced rank and fortune. Sumptuary laws, regulations dictating who could wear what, ensured that status remained visible. To wear silk, ermine, or cloth of gold was to participate in a kind of theater, where the body itself became a stage for wealth. Yet this display came with tension. To wear garments beyond one's rank risked legal trouble. To wear them too modestly risked appearing weak. The balance was delicate and endlessly observed. Ceremonies of inheritance and marriage also reflected wealth's symbolic role. Dowries, for example, were not just exchanges of property, but public declarations of alliance and stability. Imagine the careful arrangement of jewels, lands, and household goods presented as a bride's dowry. These objects were more than possessions. They were promises meant to secure families and futures. Symbols of wealth also extended into the realm of the sacred. Golden reliquaries, adorned with gems, held fragments of saints' bones. Pilgrims gazed upon them with awe, seeing not only spiritual power, but also the wealth of those who had commissioned such vessels. Wealth and faith became intertwined, each enhancing the other. Yet, as with all things, symbolism had its shadow. To fail in these rituals, to host a feast poorly, to neglect patronage, to dress below one's rank, invited whispers of decline. Wealth was not only possession, but constant performance, constantly observed and judged. Archaeologists find traces of these rituals in banquet halls, in decorative tableware, in clothing fragments, and in the ruins of vast churches. Each object tells us not just of ownership, but of symbolism, a reminder that wealth was meant to be seen, to be shared, and to be remembered. As you rest, you might imagine yourself at such a feast, listening to the clinking of goblets, the low hum of conversation, the soft crackle of torches. Behind the pageantry, however, was a quiet burden, the knowledge that one wrong step, one failed performance, might undo years of carefully built prestige. In the next part, we will turn to mysteries and cultural contradictions, the hidden side of wealth, including secret rituals, folklore, and the strange beliefs that haunted the medieval elite. Not all of wealth in medieval times was openly displayed. Some of it lived in whispers and contradictions, in stories half believed and half feared. Archaeologists and historians still piece together these traces, the hints of secret rituals, concealed treasures, and the uneasy relationship the rich had with fortune. Imagine a grand manor, where the family's chapel held not only relics of saints, but also hidden compartments in the walls. Wealth was not always shown. Sometimes it was concealed for fear of theft or suspicion. Buried chests, locked coffers, and hidden cellars all served as quiet guardians of fortune. Many such hoards are unearthed today, coins and jewels resting untouched for centuries, testaments to wealth that never reached its heirs. Superstition surrounded riches. It was believed that sudden wealth could attract misfortune, that envy carried almost physical weight. Folklore told of cursed treasures, of coins that brought ruin, of rings that seemed to bind their owners in misfortune. Some nobles even arranged for priests to bless their possessions, as though sanctity might shield them from the envy of others or from fate itself. There were contradictions, too. On the one hand, wealth was seen as divine favor, a sign of God's blessing. On the other, Christian teaching warned of greed, excess, and the dangers of riches. Preachers spoke of the camel and the eye of the needle, of the perils awaiting the rich in the afterlife. This tension haunted medieval elites. They gave generously to churches and monasteries, but also hoarded luxuries behind castle walls. Legends sprang up around these contradictions. Tales told of knights who returned from crusades with fabulous spoils, only to see their families cursed. Folklore whispered that the restless dead guarded buried treasures, their spirits bound to gold they could never spend. Even in humble villages, rumors abounded of hidden coins buried beneath hearthstones, waiting for the bold or the foolish to dig them up. Archaeological finds sometimes confirm these whispers. Small hoards of coins, carefully wrapped and buried, appear in fields or beneath floors. Were they hidden during times of war, or concealed by families who feared their neighbors' envy? We cannot always know, but the silence of these finds speaks louder than words. Even architecture bore traces of mystery. Certain symbols carved into stone, protective marks, or talismans, were believed to guard households and possessions. The rich might adorn their doorways with charms, as though carved symbols could stand against fate, envy, or theft. The performance of wealth in public stood side by side with these private fears. To appear too rich could bring envy. To appear too modest could invite scorn. It was a delicate dance, haunted by contradictions and by the mysteries wealth always seemed to carry. As you rest, imagine a medieval hall at night, its torches dimmed, its treasures locked away. Outside, the village sleeps, whispering of the riches hidden within. In the silence, wealth becomes not just power, but burden, secret, and story, half real, half imagined. In the next segment, we will step away from mysteries and turn toward contrast, the stark differences between the lives of the wealthy and the lives of ordinary people, and how this gap shaped the rhythm of medieval society. To understand what it meant to be rich in the medieval world, it helps to see it in contrast. The wealth of lords, nobles, and kings was only part of the story. Beneath it, supporting it, lived a vast population whose lives looked profoundly different. Imagine a great manor house, with stone walls, timber halls, and servants bustling about. Now, just beyond its gates, picture a small cluster of thatched cottages. Here, peasants lived in one-room homes, with packed earth floors and smoky interiors. While the lord's table might be laid with silver dishes and imported spices, the peasants' meals consisted mostly of bread, pottage, and seasonal vegetables. The rhythm of work, too, diverged sharply. For the wealthy, time was measured by appointments, ceremonies, and obligations of status. For the poor, it was tied directly to the land. Sunrise called them to the fields, to plowing, sowing, or harvesting, depending on the season. Wealth insulated nobles from hunger during bad harvests. For peasants, a failed crop might mean desperate measures. Clothing told its own story. Nobles wore wool dyed deep with expensive pigments, crimson, blue, green, and fabrics of silk or velvet, soft to the touch, carefully tailored. In contrast, peasants wore rougher wool and linen, hand-spun and patched again and again. Where one class displayed wealth on their bodies, the other displayed resilience in their repairs. Homes reflected this division, too. While nobles slept in chambers with carved furniture, feather bedding, and hearths for warmth, most peasants lay on straw pallets, sharing the space with family members, and sometimes even with animals during the winter months. Comfort was unevenly distributed, one class removed from the struggles of the other. Yet, despite this divide, life was not without moments of overlap. Market days brought both rich and poor together, exchanging goods, catching glimpses into each other's worlds. A peasant might watch as a noble rode by on horseback, cloaked in fur. A noble might glance upon villagers bartering, their hands rough from labor. These moments revealed both the distance and the nearness of the two spheres. The burdens of wealth and poverty differed, yet both carried weight. Nobles faced political risks, expectations, and a constant need to maintain appearances. Peasants endured physical hardship, hunger, and vulnerability to the elements. Neither life was simple, but the contrast shaped the very fabric of medieval society. As you drift further into the story, picture the two landscapes. The grand hall, warm with firelight and filled with rich fabrics, and the humble cottage, where smoke curls from a small hearth. The world of medieval Europe contained both, side by side, divided yet connected. In our next part, we will move deeper into perspective of the common people, and see how their daily lives unfolded beneath the shadow of wealth. Imagine yourself now in the shoes of a medieval peasant. Your day begins before the first light of dawn. The rooster crows, though you might already be awake, stirred by the cold air creeping through gaps in the wooden walls of your cottage. The fire, banked low overnight, offers little warmth. You rise, gather kindling, and coax the embers into a small flame to prepare the first meal of the day. Breakfast is simple, perhaps coarse bread, yesterday's pottage thickened with root vegetables, or a thin ale that provides both hydration and calories. There is little ceremony in these meals, only the necessity of fuel for the hours of labor ahead. Unlike the noble family, who may take their morning meal in a hall surrounded by attendants, your dining is quiet, shared with family, children rubbing their eyes, and perhaps a neighbor visiting before heading to the fields. The work itself is relentless. In spring, you plow with wooden or iron-tipped tools, often behind oxen. In summer, you weed and tend to the crops. Autumn brings a harvest, long days of cutting, binding, and storing. Winter, though lighter in farm labor, is not a season of ease. It is a season of mending, spinning, repairing tools, and ensuring that precious food stores last until fields yield again. Your hands are rough, your back often bent. Hunger is a constant threat. A bad harvest can mean going without, or depending on the mercy of your Lord, who may release grain stores, though sometimes only in exchange for service or additional obligations. The wealthy may experience shortages too, but rarely starvation. For peasants, the line between survival and loss is perilously thin. Illness, too, is an ever-present risk. Without the remedies and comforts available to the rich, even minor sickness can become grave. A simple fever, untreated, might sweep through a household. Yet resilience shines here. Communities often care for one another, sharing food, tending to the sick, and helping repair roofs or fences. Bonds of mutual reliance soften the harshness of life, even if only slightly. Clothing, patched and worn, often had to be mended again and again. Boots were precious, sometimes handed down or shared. Children often went barefoot in summer. By contrast, nobles wrapped themselves in layers of rich fabrics, sometimes too many to be practical. Where one class carried the visible weight of wealth, the other carried the invisible burden of endurance. And yet, despite these hardships, joy and celebration still existed. Festivals marked the changing of seasons. Saints' days broke the monotony of labor, and weddings or village gatherings filled the air with laughter, music, and dance. For a moment, rich and poor alike shared in the rhythms of life, though the quality of the feast and the duration of the revelry might differ. As you picture this contrast, imagine yourself at the edge of a village festival. A nobleman observes from a distance, guarded, while villagers circle the fire, their simple garments catching the glow. Both live within the same world, yet their experiences diverge like paths splitting in a forest, one well-paved, the other rocky and uneven. In our next part, we will turn fully to the nobility once more and see how their burdens and privileges carry their own form of weight, sometimes enviable, sometimes unexpectedly heavy. Imagine yourself stepping through the heavy oak doors of a great hall. Torches flicker against the stone walls, casting long shadows across carved beams and banners displaying coats of arms. A noble family gathers here, not for leisure alone, but for the daily performance of power. Each seat is carefully arranged. Each gesture, each word carries significance. Wealth affords comfort, yet it also demands constant vigilance. For the nobleman, authority over lands and people was both a blessing and a burden. With wealth came obligations to administer justice, to collect rents, to maintain defenses. Failure in these tasks risked rebellion, loss of reputation, or even seizure of lands by higher lords. The noble's presence in court was not optional. His loyalty had to be demonstrated in person, through gifts, attendance, and military service. For noble women, life was marked by both privilege and limitation. Rich fabrics and jewels adorned them, yet their futures were often decided by alliances. A marriage was rarely a matter of affection. It was a negotiation, binding families together in networks of power. A wedding dress might shimmer with embroidery, but beneath the fine cloth was a weight of expectation, of producing heirs, of managing households and estates in their husbands' absence. Children of the wealthy were not exempt from pressures either. Sons were trained early for knighthood or clerical study, their lives shaped by duty long before adulthood. Daughters learned the intricacies of managing estates, correspondence, and etiquette. A misstep in manners or loyalty could ripple outward, reflecting not just on themselves, but on their entire lineage. And then there was the matter of appearance. Nobility required display. Feasts had to be lavish, clothes resplendent, retinues impressive. Yet, behind the show, Some nobles faced debts, borrowing against their lands or levying heavy dues on peasants to maintain appearances. Wealth had to be seen to be believed. A lord too frugal risked seeming weak. A lord too extravagant risked ruin. Compared to the peasant's life, the noble world shimmered with privilege. Yet it was not without its own anxieties, not hunger, but honor, not survival, but status. Their struggles were gilded, but still real. If you close your eyes now, picture the noble household gathered around a table. Silverware gleams. A servant pours wine into heavy cups. Conversation is measured, cautious, each word carrying weight. Outside the hall, peasants laugh around their festival fire. Inside, nobility sit beneath the vaulted roof, held fast by tradition, ceremony, and the unyielding demands of their station. And so, the medieval world was bound together in contrasts. The poor enduring with resilience, the rich displaying power with unease, each carrying a weight the other might not wish to bear. As we step out of this hall, we will bring our long journey toward its close, with a gentle reflection, a calming return to present, and an invitation to rest. And so, we reach the end of this long path of the medieval world, a world where wealth could weigh heavily, where privilege brought its own pressures, and where every life, whether humble or grand, was shaped by duty, tradition, and the quiet rhythm of days passing into nights. We have walked through villages and castles, festivals and feasts, sickness and ceremony. We have lingered with peasants in their fields, listened to merchants tally accounts in their dim-lit shops, and stepped into the hushed halls of nobles where every gesture carried consequence. Through it all, one truth threads quietly through the centuries. Life in the Middle Ages was never simple, never easy, whether one held little or much. As you rest now, you may reflect on how fortunate it is to lie in the present, in the comfort of your own time, without the weight of feudal duties or the uncertainty of harvests. You need not keep up appearances at a costly feast, nor wake before dawn to plow frozen ground. You can simply allow these images to drift like fading candlelight, here and gone, replaced by the steady calm of your own breath. If this kind of calm storytelling has helped you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. And if you like, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time of night it is. It is strangely comforting to know how many others are out there, drifting into the same old stories, finding rest in the echoes of history. So dim the lights. Let the past settle gently like falling snow. The voices of long-gone centuries fade into silence, and the quiet of the present wraps softly around you. I am the Sleepy Historian, and this has been another journey into boring history for sleep. May it bring you rest, comfort, and a peaceful night. Good night.